This was just before. This was during Ramadan and just before the Muslim celebration of Eid, which is right at the end of Ramadan. And it's a big celebration. People buy new clothes and the children get gifts, and everybody was preparing for this. And of course, the bombing began, this assault began, and young children were coming to terms with the fact that they will not see the day where they can wear these new clothes. They will not have that celebration where they get these wonderful presents, because we're all going to heaven, because they're going to die, just like their next door neighbor died, just like their friend in school died within a matter of days. So I'm sitting in Jerusalem. I'm hearing all of this from friends in Gaza. And there's a sense of helplessness. You know, I could drive there. I could be there in an hour. But there's nothing I can do. There's nothing I can do. I'm sitting there helpless. And it's a terrible feeling. It's a terrible feeling at all. I mean, in general, even when you're here, but when you're there, that close, and there's no ability to bring about change. It's a terrible feeling. It's a real sense of helplessness. So that was, you know, the attacks from Gaza was one part of it. Sheikh Jarrah, this beautiful Palestinian neighborhood in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem, has been in the news for months. Actually, it's been in the news for almost, I'd say, at least a decade. Because the state of Israel decided they were going to get rid of the Palestinians that live in Sheikh Jarrah. They're going to get rid of this beautiful Palestinian neighborhood that has a rich history and a rich heritage. Sheikh Jarrah has some of the most beautiful homes, Palestinian homes in Jerusalem. It's home to the mosque of Sheikh Jarrah. Sheikh Jarrah was the physician of Salah ad-Din, and he's buried there. So the history of the neighborhood goes back to the 12th century. In 1948, after one of the worst massacres that took place in 1948 in the village of Dir Yassin, a very prominent Palestinian woman by the name of Hind al-Husseini built an orphanage and a school for the orphans who survived the massacre. And it's in Sheikh Jarrah, and it still functions today as a school, a boarding school, and also a day school. There's a very famous women's college there, also established by Hind al-Husseini, by the same woman, a women's college in Sheikh Jarrah. There's a beautiful home called the Orient House, which always acted as a center for politics and culture in Jerusalem, for Palestinian politics and culture. All of this is part of this neighborhood. It's a wonderful and beautiful Palestinian homes, and they want to destroy it. They want to get rid of the Palestinians, and they want to build apartments for settlers in that neighborhood. Then on the other side of Jerusalem, there is a community, the town of Silwan, which is a town of over 50,000 people, which is right outside the old city. And they're building a massive archaeological park there called the City of David, and they are getting rid of Palestinians wholesale. The ethnic cleansing is done in broad daylight, and you can see the Israeli settler families moving in, many of them Americans, of course, moving in. They're armed, they have their own militia. The Israeli authorities send their own armed forces there to protect the settlers and harass and kill the Palestinians. And then what we saw, which was perhaps the most troubling of all, the sites of, during Ramadan, in the Al-Aqsa compound, in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is one of the holiest sites for Muslims, in general, throughout the world. Israeli forces, massive amounts of Israeli forces, barging into the mosque while people were worshiping, shooting, destroying, using live ammunition, using tear gas, enormous destruction, enormous loss of everything, loss of the infrastructure, loss of, I don't think people were killed, but there were many, many injuries and so on. I had friends who were there during these assaults. And all this is taking place in Ramadan. So it's an escalation of the violence, and it's an escalation of this, we're going to push you out. We're going to push you out when we want to push you out. We don't care about your holy places. We don't care about your religion. We don't care about your holidays and your celebrations. We don't care about your children. We're going to kick you out. We're going to destroy you. We're going to desecrate your holy places because we can, because it's ours. This is the Zionist attitude. And what we saw again in May was this incredible uprising. So while Israel tries to separate everything and say, well, this is happening in Jerusalem and this is happening in Gaza, as though the things are not related, it is all related. Palestinians in Gaza were shooting rockets to defend or to attempt to defend the people in Jerusalem and in Al-Aqsa and their right to worship. And of course, like I said, the rest of Palestine stood. Palestinians everywhere stood up, and Israelis were shocked because they're not used to seeing this. Israelis still live in this paradigm, Zionist paradigm, where one part of Palestine is not connected to the other part of Palestine. But of course, they're all connected. Palestinians in Jordan and other, around Palestine were marching to the border and protesting as well. And then we saw something very interesting. We saw in the aftermath, or even during the Israeli assaults, we saw people around the world coming up to express solidarity with Palestinians. We saw record numbers here in the United States. We saw record numbers around the world, people standing up and protesting Israeli crimes. And as I'm sitting in Jerusalem and traveling around the country, I went to Sheikh Jarrah, I went to Silwan, I went to Al-Aqsa, I even entered the Al-Aqsa compound. In other words, I went everywhere. I was there. And seeing the protests, on the one hand, of course, it's encouraging. It's a good thing because, of course, record numbers are standing up. On the other hand, there's a sense that where were they before the assault? 200 plus people were massacred, were slaughtered in Gaza. God knows how many Palestinians were killed throughout as a result of Israeli violence towards the protesters in general throughout the entire country. More than 3,000 Palestinian citizens of Israel were arrested and tortured. Many of them I know. Where were we before this happened? Why are we out? Why are people always coming out when it's too late? Why are people always coming out after the fact? And the reality that I think people don't fully grasp is that there is no one defending Palestinians. There is no one to protect Palestinian children. No one. Israel can kill Palestinian children in Gaza and there are no consequences. There's nobody there. There's nobody to stand in their way. Israel is arresting and torturing young Palestinians who stand up, and there's nobody to protect them. The Palestinian Authority, which is an arm of the state of Israel, of the Israeli government, tortured and murdered Nizar Banat, a Palestinian activist from Hebron. Who was there to defend him, to protect him? Yes, everybody stood up later on in social media, and there were protests. Of course, many of the Palestinians that were protesting that ended up in jail as well. But where are we? There is no one to defend Palestinians, whether they're children, whether they're activists, whether they're people who are trying to live in their homes and their homes are being demolished. Nobody stands in between the Israeli authorities who want to demolish a home and the Palestinians whose home is being demolished to defend them. No one. No one is standing between the Israeli authorities and the violent, racist Israeli youth that barge in and kick Palestinians out of their homes, whether it's in Sheikh Jarrah, whether it's throughout the entire old city of Jerusalem, whether it's other cities like Jaffa and other parts of the country, because it's happening everywhere. They're actually bringing busloads of young Israelis that many of us saw, the images of screaming death to Arabs and so forth, into Palestinian towns in order to provoke and instigate. And then I went to court to a hearing where Palestinians were arrested after they were beaten up by Israeli mobs, just in the street, on a campus university, citizens of Israel. So where are we? What's the point of standing up after this is already done? Every single time Israel murders and slaughters and arrests and demolishes and destroys, and then we stand up and protest. There's nobody else to defend. There's nobody else to stand for Palestinians but us. This is it. And when I say us, I mean people of conscience. People of conscience throughout the world need to stand up and resist Zionism. People of conscience around the world need to stand up and stand against Israel. Clearly, and as forcibly as possible. It needs to be done every day. It needs to be done in every arena. It needs to be done at every opportunity, whether it is boycotting Israeli products, whether it's boycotting Israeli teams, Israeli musicians, people who represent the state of Israel in general, in any way, shape, or form. It is up to us to do this. No one else is going to do this. And until this is done, there will be another assault on Gaza and more dead Palestinian children, and there will be more Palestinians arrested and tortured and more Palestinians home demolished, and on and on and on. Israel is very clear where it's going. We have a 75-year history of the state of Israel, and several decades even before that, of the Zionist movement in Palestine. It's very clear what their objective is: a complete ethnic cleansing and destruction of Palestine and Palestinian people. That is the aim. There's no question about that. Regardless of what they say, regardless of what they claim, they go to the polls very often recently, and they vote for the same racist, genocidal maniacs that lead Israel. Every single time they go to the elections, and not just now, going back 75 years. The same people who conducted the ethnic cleansing of 1948, the same people who conducted massacres over and over again throughout the decades, and the people right now. In fact, a lot of these politicians, as they run for office, they show their military record. And what is their military record? Israel is not at war with anyone. Israel is engaged in genocide. So they show how they've destroyed Gaza. They show how they've killed Palestinians in other countries, in Lebanon or in Jordan or where else. This is a sign of this is a badge of honor that you killed Palestinians, that you fought Palestinians, that you oppressed Palestinians, that you participated in the worst kind of war crimes and crimes against humanity. That is a plus. That is something you wear as a badge of honor as you run in Israeli elections. So Israelis keep voting for these people. So it's clear that this is what Israelis want. Of course, then we see the images of murder Arabs, and then the marches throughout the old city of Jerusalem, and really what could only be described as almost as pogroms. And we always come out and protest after. Now, I come from Israeli society. I was raised in a Zionist family. My father was a general. I had a great uncle who was the president of the state of Israel. I come from within that realm, from within that sphere. I know what it's about. When I talk about Zionism, when I talk about Israel, it's not because I learned about it in a college course or read a book. I was raised with it. I know the prejudices. I know I know the racism. I'm familiar with the racist characterizations of Arabs and Palestinians and Muslims that exist in Israeli society. And it's abhorrent. It's horrifying. I took the journey. My book is called The General Son: Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. I took the journey from the sphere of the colonizer, the Israeli, into the sphere, to borrow from Fanon, to the sphere of the occupied, of the colonized, the Palestinians. And that's when I had this awakening. Everything I was told was a lie. Everything Israelis are told is a lie. Today, it's a little bit less so, because Israelis have internalized racism to a point that they don't need to be lied to. They think it's okay. In other words, they know what is taking place, they know what is happening, and they're okay with it. So, again, going back to the line of defense, we are the only line of defense that Palestinians have. But we always wake up too late. We go out to the streets after the people have died. the protests, as large and as important as great as they were, they didn't help the 200 and plus Palestinians who were killed in Gaza, the ones who are going to be dying from their wounds because there is no access to medical care. They're not going to help the Palestinian child in Gaza who has a curable cancer but's going to die because Israel won't give them access to the type of medical care that they need. Although it exists, an Israeli child with curable cancer is going to live with the exact same cancer. The children of my friends, my activist friends who are now themselves activists and are now themselves being tortured by the Israeli secret police, this isn't helping them. But there is a way. Palestinians have given us a path. Palestinians have given us a gift in the name, in having put out the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, BDS, which is why I wear this badge. It's a gift. It's telling us here is what needs to happen. This is what you need to do to bring about justice for Palestinians. Here's what we need you to do. Boycott, divestment, and sanctions. There's a movement, there's a website, there's information, there are campaigns. Now get to work. So people get busy, well, is it anti-Semitic? Is it not as anti-Semitic? Is it helpful? Is it not helpful? Get to work, Palestinians. Is it helpful for Palestinians? Palestinians have told us what to do. Palestinian civil society told us what they need. We need to make sure that any American elected official, whether they're running for school board or for national office or for president, understand that they must stand against Zionism, that they must support BDS. Otherwise, they will not be elected. Sadly, the only political party in America that actually has that kind of consciousness, of course, is the Green Party. But we all vote for school boards. Any school board in any city council and mayor and police chief of any city, they get tapped by the Zionists. They get a phone call. They get an invitation. They're invited to a trip. They get curriculum, they get handed to them, curricula for schools. Our public schools, anything that has to do with that part of the world, the curriculum is governed by Zionist not-for-profits in the different states that make sure the right thing is in the textbooks. Public schools. Of course, it's, social sciences mostly. We need to make sure that anybody running for school board makes a commitment. They will reject Zionism. They will reject the Zionist attempts to influence the education system. They will reject the Zionist invitations to visit Israel. And they will stand against all forms of racism. Stand against all forms of racism, including Zionism. Whether they run for school board, city council, mayor, and on and on and on, up the chain. We need to create an environment where people understand that there should be zero tolerance to Zionism, because Zionism is a racist, violent ideology that produced a racist, apartheid, violent state called Israel. And that's it. On issues like racism, there's no middle ground. You either reject it or you support it. And that's our toughest challenge. Because even in today's atmosphere, even during May, in the month of May, even though there was some debate in Congress on whether or not to send Israel an additional $730 million while it was using this money, while it was bombing and murdering people in Gaza. So for the first time, there actually was discussion in Congress, and there was a debate on whether or not to send it, or there was a call to not send Israel this additional money. And as this was going on, and Bernie Sanders, of course, was part of that, then he sits down and he says, well, we need to tone down the rhetoric. Why do we need to tone down the rhetoric? He was talking, the context was, recognizing that Israel is an apartheid state, and some claim that that somehow contributes to anti-Semitism. Well, If anything contributes to anti-Semitism, it's not calling it apartheid. It's the existence of the apartheid. It's not naming Israel as a racist state. It's the existence of a racist state that claims to be Jewish, that claims to represent Jews, which is killing Palestinians. That, if anything, could be cause for anti-Semitism. Not the fact that we recognize it, not the fact that we point it out. What is Bernie Sanders thinking? Tone down the rhetoric as children are being slaughtered, burnt. A little girl, 9 days in the rubble before they found her dead body. Why? Why do we tone down the rhetoric when Israel is doing this with American taxpayer money, American weapons? Why do we tone down the rhetoric when America gives Israel foreign aid? It's a rich country. Give foreign aid to poor countries. So we need to tone down the rhetoric? What, is he out of his mind? Why do they always shoot to miss? Liberal Americans always shoot to miss. Yes, Israel is doing bad things, but we need to tone down the rhetoric. We need to tone up the rhetoric to a point where nobody can hear anything but our screams and our cries to save Palestine and save Palestinians. That's what we need to do. Crank up the volume so that nobody can hear anything else. We need to be screaming at the rooftops, at the top of our voices. Israel is murdering Palestinians and they're doing it on our watch every single day. In the jails, in the torture chambers, in Gaza, all parts of Palestine. And from time to time outside of Palestine when the mood strikes. They kill people in Syria, they kill people in Lebanon. And this is somehow okay with everybody? We need to tone down the rhetoric? The problem is that we call it apartheid, not that it is apartheid. The problem is that we recognize that it's a racist, violent state, not the fact that it is a racist, violent state. So we need to stand and we need to demand, not to support, not to call for, not to request, to demand sanctions against Israel, to demand a boycott of Israel, to demand divestment. Now, Palestinians didn't only come out with a call of boycott, divestment, and sanctions. They also came with a very clear list of demands. Reasonable, measured, sensible, remedial. Ending the military occupation in parts of Palestine that are still occupied by the military. Allowing the refugees to return. Both of which, by the way, ending the occupation, allowing the refugees to return, this has already been sanctioned by international law. It's been sanctioned by United Nations resolutions. It's even been sanctioned by here in the United States. And equal rights. Those are the three demands. Ending the military occupation, allowing the refugees to return, and equal rights. These are the three areas that Palestinians are suffering as a result of the existence of Israel. We have refugees, millions of refugees languishing in refugee camps in and around Palestine only because Israel will not allow them to return. Educated people. No access to electricity, to clean water, to medical care, horrible conditions. Why? Because Israel does not want them back. That's it. And within Palestine, areas in Palestine that are still under military occupation, and equal rights. And when I talk to liberal Zionists, they always say to me, you know, I agree with you 95%. I agree with 95% of what you say. Well, isn't that darn now 5%, huh? What is that 5% exactly? What is it? It's recognizing that Palestinians are human beings. It's recognizing that Zionism is racism. And the idea of a state for Jews only in an Arab country is racist. That's the 5% that they have a problem with. But I didn't make that happen. This is what Zionism did. Of course, my family contributed a lot. I recognize that. I do enjoy the privilege of being, the colonizer when I'm there, of course. I try to use it as best I can to fight the system, but I mean, that is the reality. But that is the problem. They don't want to give up the privilege. I don't think Bernie Sanders wants to give up the privilege, or many other liberal Zionists, that they stand with Palestinians, but with some, caveats. Don't go too far. Don't raise the volume too high. Tone it down when we tell you to. Don't ask for too much. And most importantly, wait until we are ready. We, the Jews around the world, need to feel comfortable with your existence before you can have rights. It doesn't matter if we live, American Jews live in New York, in Washington, D.C., in Los Angeles. Doesn't matter where we live, in Baltimore. It doesn't matter where we live, but we need to be comfortable that you over there will accommodate us when we want you to. A good friend of mine, Tahir Zalla from AMP, American Muslims for Palestine, here in DC or in Virginia, he was at an event here, not far, in Tacoma Park, and the place was packed. And at the end, during the Q&A, an older Jewish gentleman stood up and says, don't you believe that we have a right for a safe haven, to have a place where we Jewish people are safe? This guy lived in America his whole life. His children probably live here. He's got property. He's a wealthy American who happens to be Jewish. But he wants to be safe over there. So Tahir said to him, you know what? I got 4 words for you. Not at my expense. You want to live in Tacoma Park, in a suburb of Washington, D.C., with all the wealth and the privilege, and keep Palestinians over there out of their homes, living without safety, living without access to medical care or any kind of privilege at all, with no one to defend them, because you over here want to feel that you're safe to go there whenever you feel like. This is what it's about. That's the 5% that they always disagree with. It's seeing the Palestinians have rights, that they're human beings that have rights like everybody else, and also understanding that when Palestinians enjoy the same privileges as I do in Palestine, as citizens, with equal rights, with access to the resources, with the right to return to their homes and their lands, that will not take away from anybody else. There's plenty to go around. Just because Palestinians, I was talking to a Palestinian from Jerusalem. He was telling me a story about his family, how his family negotiated with the Sultan in the 15th century. He lives in America. He can only go as an American citizen as a tourist. His family's been there since before the 15th century. They already were an established clan, the Dajani clan in Jerusalem. They probably came with Salah ad-Din, I don't know with who exactly. But he can't go back. His family's graveyard in near the old city of Jerusalem goes back hundreds of years. My grandparents came to colonize 100 years ago. I have more rights than he does. So if he can go back, why will that hurt me? The return of Palestinian refugees will only enhance everybody's life. It will enhance Palestine. These are people who want to go back and contribute and build their country and live in it. They don't want any handouts. They don't want money from anyone. There's plenty of money as it is. They want to go back to their lands, to their home, to live, to contribute, to raise their children. But no. Because an old Jewish guy in Tacoma Park is not going to feel very comfortable if Palestinians go back. So they have to stay in refugee camps, millions of them. That's the 5% that they always disagree with me about. These liberal Zionists, liberal Americans. So we have to take control. We, as people who are people of conscience, full conscience, not 95% of a conscience. People who have a heart and have a conscience need to stand for Palestine every day. We need to demand that our elected officials wear this pin. Not just say they support BDS under some conditions. They need to wear the pin. They need to demand and enact sanctions against the state of Israel. The Sixth Fleet in the Mediterranean needs to go right now and impose a no-fly zone over Gaza and provide immediate humanitarian aid as a result of the bombing, because Israel won't allow care. That's our role. To come out after the fact may feel good, but it does nobody any good, because by the time the next attack comes out, everybody's going to forget those protests. So the Israeli, PR machine has to work a little bit extra hard while we protest, and then everybody goes back to, normal. That should be our mission. That should be the mission of everybody in the Green Party, because the Green Party is a party of people with a conscience. That's why we're in the Green Party. But it needs to touch everybody. It needs to touch everybody beyond politics, beyond religion, beyond ethnicity. It has nothing to do with religion. It has nothing to do with politics. It has to do with humanity. It has to do with having a conscience or not having a conscience. It has to do with having 100% of a conscience or only a 95% of a conscience. It has to do with not toning down the rhetoric, but cranking it up and making demands, again, from school board all the way up to national office. So we got a work cut out for us, because this is, America's a big country, and the Zionists are working very, very hard. They're very effective. They've been doing it for a very long time, but we can do it. It's been done. Activists in America, I know many activists who were involved heavily with the fight against apartheid in South Africa. And it was a fight that nobody thought they would win. Nobody thought they would win. State by state, city by city, the pressure mounted and mounted and mounted until that was it. It was done. That's what needs to happen here. So basically, even though, my entire presentation is quite grim, perhaps, I believe that we have the ability to bring about change. I believe that we have the ability to free Palestine. I believe we have the ability to stand with Palestinians, but we need to do it, and we need to do it yesterday. Tomorrow morning, we all need to stand, and we need to know what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. With our friends, with our family, with our neighbors, with our communities, with our churches, with our schools, with the campuses, with the young students on campuses who do fantastic, courageous work. Students for Justice in Palestine and American Muslims and Muslim student associations. They do tremendous work, courageous beyond belief. We need to be there with them as well. So like I always say, I like to say at the end of my presentations, there's no question in my mind that Palestine will be free. But it's up to us whether or not it's going to be free soon, or whether it's going to be free, who knows when. And if we act and if we do what we're called to do, then I believe we can make big positive changes that will impact everyone for the better. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad you were able to do this. And I really appreciate this exhortation. What I'm going to do, and this is really great too. I did not know much about you. I tripped over this issue many, many years ago before it was on the radar of just about anywhere in this country, and began to keep my ears open for this. And so it's been, we've had a number of speakers where I live. We had in Iowa City, we had a group that was one of the few groups for a long time that were actually raising awareness of this. So hopefully we'll have you out at some time. What I'd like to do now, I'm going to change to gallery view, and if you have a chance for Q&A, I hope that's amenable to you. What we can do is I'll be checking for raised hands, or you can put something in the chat. And to get started here, what I'd like to do is ask you for some resources. First of all, someone asked if we could order books directly from your publisher. And then also resources for BDS, because that seems to be one of the very few things that can be done immediately and used to see these more. So if you have anything that you can mention or put in the chat, if you could mention those two things, and I'll start taking stack for questions. I
can put it in the chat, but I can also say that it's very simple. People can go to justworldbooks.com, Just World Books. They published my two books, The General Sun and Injustice, and they can order directly from them. You don't have to go through Amazon. And in terms of resources, the best thing to do is to go to bdsmovement.org. It's all there. bdsmovement.org, it's all there. And Just World Books is the publisher for my books. So it's very simple, very easy. And it's all there.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so we've got a couple questions here. Debra Rosario. They'll ask you to unmute. And those of you, I think everybody is muted. So yeah, go ahead. I'll also ask you to unmute. Debra Rosario, go ahead.
Miko, do you know how much the gas industry or the natural gas industry has to do with lots of the ethnic cleansing that's going on in Gaza right now?
Well, the ethnic cleansing has been going on before they discovered natural gas, but of course, Israel they did discover natural gas, and so Israel has every intention of stealing it and using it. But you know, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine began even before that. It's about resources. It's about a racist nationalist ideology, which is Zionism, probably more than anything.
Because it seems like it's been accelerated, and I'm asking you this because one of the people who founded Genie Corporation, right? He's from the Bronx, and his name is Howard Jonas. And actually, there's actually 3 hedge fund managers that they're from the Bronx, and they fund a lot of the local politicians. And one of the other 2 is Paul Singer and Roger Hector, and they actually funded my congressman, and they also funded my city council person. And I know Paul Singer, he funds a lot of the settlements in Palestine, and Roger Hector, he does he funds also a lot of the settlements, and it's really and I think he also he gives money to Israeli politicians. But I know Howard Jonas had big investment in Genie Corporation.
Yeah.
For the last 4 years, and I was following them for the last 4 years since 2016, and they got into the stock exchange. And when I got to the when they got into the stock exchange, I knew I knew that things were going to get worse over there.
So maybe we can hear what. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but if you want to go ahead or here, there are a couple of.
No, yeah, I said what I had to say. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, right now, my group, we're trying to do a protest against my local congressman, Richie Torres. His campaign was totally funded by Paul Lee Singer. And if anyone know about Elliott Management? Elliott Management, they're a vulture capitalist. They buy debt from privileged nations, and then they turn around and tell these privileged nations, you have to pay 100% of that debt, and they sue in American courts. So we're setting up a protest to out Richie Torres. He's supposed to be a progressive, but he's actually not, you know. So my little group here in the Bronx, that's what we're trying to do in the next month.
That's great. That's excellent. Yeah. Very good. That's great. Yeah, that's absolutely terrific. Yeah, very good.
So let's see. Let's see. I have a Randy Hicks. Randy Hicks, I'm going to ask you to unmute, please.
Thank you for having this. Thank you for having this presentation. I actually had 2. This is a 2-part question. One, how did a negotiation for peace come about between Israel and Palestine and Hamas in the last little skirmish that they had? And number 2, how could we get a successful BDS resolution passed in the state of California? Because it's not happened yet, and we've tried very hard. Thank you.
Well, there was never any peace agreement signed. There was a ceasefire between the state of Israel and the Palestinian government in Gaza, which is represented now by Hamas. To say that the agreement was between Israel and Hamas is like to say that the signed agreements are between the Republicans and, I don't know, the Koreans or the Republicans. It's not about the party, it's about the country, right? It's not between Hamas and the Likud party. It's between the state of Israel and the elected Palestinian representatives in Gaza, which happen to be Hamas. But there was a ceasefire, which Israel violated immediately after it was signed. But it was very interesting because I was talking to people in Gaza, chatting with people as this was happening, and there's a sense of relief that, oh, thank God, maybe we can celebrate a little bit of the holiday of the Eid. Maybe, we can have some sense of normalcy. But the level of destruction that Israel caused this time around was so severe that people were just really stunned. And you can imagine people in Gaza who have been through so much, for them to be stunned even more than before. Is really, really shocking. But that was the reality. And in terms of passing a BDS resolution in the state of California, that's a tough mountain to climb, but I love the idea. I think it's really, really important. I know similar initiatives took place in the fight against apartheid in South Africa, where there were several states actually passed boycott BDS resolutions. It's going to take everybody working together very, 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 very hard to beat the Zionists. I mean, California is a tough one. It's a big state. But, and like I said, it starts with the school boards. It starts with the curriculum in the schools. It starts with all these Jewish Zionist philanthropists that give money to libraries and give money to the symphony, and they all happen to be Zionists. And now how are you going to argue with them about Israel? So it's the Zionists know, and they learned very early on that in America, all politics is local. So they are entrenched in local politics. That's why I keep saying school boards, city councils, mayor, police chief, and on and on. That's where the fight is at. So wherever it is that anybody lives, that's where I would focus my attention, on the school boards, on teachers, on certainly state legislature.
Somewhere else? You want to listen to your music?
But that's going to be that's a tough one. It's going to require a serious kind of organizing, which I would be happy to help with if anybody wants to, is up for the job. Absolutely. But perhaps it would be easier to start with smaller states, like maybe Vermont or Connecticut, or
So let's see. I'm looking at two more questions here. We've got a laugh and a thumbs up. Paul Gilman, I'm asking you to unmute, and then there's Yoda. So Paul Gilman, go ahead. Oh, okay. Unmute if you can. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
This has been a great, seminar, lecture. I'd like to sort of follow through with what Debra Rosario of the Bronx Greens was saying. That, yeah, Miko, we've been doing a lot of anti-Palestinian stuff, going to all the demonstrations.
Pro-Palestinian stuff.
And then we're gonna do a demonstration against our Congress jerk on his birthday, on Paulie Singer's birthday. Send him you can use your own epitaph birthday, okay? So if you would like maybe you could call in and we could put you on the mic, or maybe if you're in the Bronx around when we're doing these things, you could drop in at the protest or something, or I don't know where you live or anything.
Yeah, let me know. I can do something by phone or something. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. I think Debra has your contact information.
Yeah.
Does she? Question for Debra.
Yeah, I do. I have your old card. Yes. Yeah.
Good. All right then. Great. Shoot me an email.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot. I'm
Sure.
finished.
Absolutely.
Great.
Great. Then I have Yoda also, I think, in New York. I'm going to ask you to unmute. Go ahead.
Hi, it's Yehuda. I'm glad I heard you my question is, the BDS sounds micromanagement. Do you think that we could use macro, and because it sounds more of the military industrial complex that's making profits? Do you think we can do a BDS on a macro level to divest from hedge funds and 403Bs and then everything else from there, that they can no longer put money, give aid to the occupation? And are you aware of where Bar-Ilan and Tel Aviv University is? Which used to be Arab villages before, and the Sheraton Hotel by the Tayelet used to be a Muslim burial ground. Are you familiar with those sites? And what happened? I heard you before in one of your lectures about when they started blowing up Iraq, all the Iraqi Jewish descent were crying. And I'm one of them. I was upset too. I don't even know if I have my property left over there. Thank you.
I'm sorry. So, Miko, somehow
Yeah, I got it.
Okay.
What you described is exactly what the divestment is intended to do. It's not intended to be micro, it's intended to be macro. What you described in terms of divestment, that's what the D stands for in BDS. That's exactly what it's about, and it's happening at a certain degree. I forget which retirement fund in Europe, in Norway, I believe, just divested from Israeli companies. So we do see that, but that's precisely what the D is about. And yes, I'm familiar with Tel Aviv and Yaffo and the history very well, and all the different parts of the city. And that's another interesting story, because people who live in Tel Aviv, for Israelis who live in Tel Aviv, for example, don't see themselves as settlers. And Tel Aviv is this wonderful Mediterranean, happy city where everybody goes out to the beach and, drinks and has fun. A lot of the beach is actually built over destroyed Palestinian communities. And of course, Tel Aviv University is well known, and others. So yeah, I'm absolutely aware of this. And I think many people are aware of it. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's see, one more. Let's see, I have Rick Greenblatt. Rick.
Yeah, hi. So yeah, I first I want to thank you for all the work that you've been doing. It's really, at the same time, I find it both inspiring and depressing. And the depressing part is how hard the fight has been and how long we fought and how little we've been accomplishing. I want to, I don't think you were saying this, but I want to make a defense of demonstrations. We in the Green Party participated in a demonstration here in San Diego where I lived a few weeks ago. And I don't think anybody really thought that we were going to end what was going on in Gaza. But what was very important is that people came together, different organizations, different backgrounds and so forth. And we came together in the feeling that we weren't crazy and we weren't united and we were in solidarity about something. And I think that kind of thing is important for building the kind of movement that we want to see. Because I'll try to be quick here. My sense is that BDS, at least where I see it, has kind of stalled. And I agree with you, and I agree with Ali and Nima, that the real key to changing the situation in Palestine is got to come from the outside, like it did in South Africa. The question, I suppose, is how do we revitalize this movement in our communities?
Yeah, I agree with what you said about the protest. I didn't mean to imply that they were not important or not useful, but what would be good to see now, perhaps now more than ever before, is that this unity that you describe and this standing together continues so as to prevent the next one, which is really, I think, what we all want to do. But I didn't mean to discount the importance of the protests. I think they were wonderful, and it's great that so many people came out. In terms of revitalizing, look, it's only us. There's nobody else but us. If we revitalize, if we organize in our communities, if we organize and put more and more pressure on our elected officials. If we do more, it will revitalize. We are the ones who need to revitalize. There's nobody else. So in a way, whether if it's going up or down, or it's plateauing, or it's working, or it's not working, it's all us. There's no one else. And there's plenty of people, even here on this platform right now, I think, that know enough in terms of activism and organizing that could take everything up, not one notch, but 10 notches in our different communities. Because you're already doing, so many of you are already doing so much. We've just heard like in the last 5 minutes. But yeah, it's up to us to get up and organize and do and be the change you want to see, be the change you want to see. It's a bumper sticker, but it's, in our case, this is it. There's no one else. There's not going to be, and I don't need to tell you this, there's not going to be an American president or an American hero or whatever. It's not ever going to come down, top down. It's going to be us that are going to force these politicians to do the right thing at some point if we are tireless. And again, I don't think I'm telling you anything you don't know, but it's up. We're the ones who are going to either vitalize or not vitalize BDS, because we have the tools and there's nobody else.
Thank you.
And I'll say one more thing. Your comment in the beginning about it being, depressing and encouraging, I mean, that's Palestine. I come back from Palestine. When I sit with my Palestinian friends, that's exactly the feeling. You're inspired by their strength, by their resilience, by their determination, by how they raise these wonderful kids. And at the same time, you look at the settlements and you look at the military and you look at the racism and you listen to the Israeli TV. And it's the most, it's so depressing. So that's Palestine. That's the reality of being part of this issue. But I don't have to tell you this either. This is the right issue and we're on the right side of the issue. So it's a good thing.
Thank you. We've got maybe a little more than 10 minutes. I see that Eli Ardan, and I've got a couple more. I've got Craig Cayetano and George Gluck. And I don't see any more hand raised. So let's go, Eli, and just keep in mind, we don't have that much longer to go, but,
I'm just going to ask a question. My son, who was born in Jerusalem, visited together with his son 2 years ago. He noticed a tremendous resistance to the apartheid on the part of youth on both sides, especially in Ramallah and other places. He went wherever he could, and he saw signs of protest against the apartheid every place he went. Has that changed?
I'm sorry, he saw signs where? I don't understand the question.
Resistance to the apartheid every place.
Well, people
Ramallah,
yeah.
Tel Aviv, every place.
Yeah. Probably more Ramallah and Tel Aviv. I mean, there are protests. There were some protests look, the reality is Israeli society is a very racist society, but there are elements in Israeli society that are doing great work. There are people there who are standing up. There are people there who support boycott and push for boycott from within. So there are great people in Israeli society who do good work, but there's just very, very few is the problem. And they're marginalized. But I'm glad your son saw those things. Yeah, absolutely. And there are efforts to, work together. But the part of the problem is that because of the apartheid and because the Israeli authorities learned so much from the South African experience, that the apartheid prevents very, very often even Palestinians from different parts of Palestine from getting together and working together. But there are people who are resisting. Of course there are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. A couple more than Craig Cayetano. I'm asking you to, yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Craig.
Thanks, Holly. Thanks, Miko. You brought up a good topic of media. So I noticed during the recent, protests and support rallies in support of Palestine here in America, there was terrible news coverage in Patterson in this area. And then I did a little digging, and I don't know if you've run across, but Patrick Drahi owns Altice, and Altice bought out Cablevision Optimum a few years back, and they're becoming this huge mega telecom, and they basically have a stranglehold over Europe and obviously now northeastern United States. So maybe we should be adding them to the list of BDS and trying to work something here, because a lot of us our hands are tied to having Altice for our internet and our cable services. And I've noticed that they're starting to hone in on their reporting too. And I don't know if you can recommend some news outlets that we can try to follow to get the real story, because I know that he created I-24, which was a pro-BB channel. So any advice on media that we can, tap into to get the real scoop and story over there?
Well, I've given up on cable a long time ago, so it's not surprising, but I think it's good information. I think that's exactly the kind of information that needs to be put out there. So you know something about the situation in your community, put it out there so other people know and they can start digging into their communities as well. But the good information, the good outlets, I mean, somebody mentioned Ali Abu Nima, Electronic Intifada. I write for Mint Press News. They've got some pretty good writers. And there's not a lot of great, mainstream news outlets, obviously, that talk about Palestine. But you learn a lot by looking at the Israeli press, and there's all the Israeli press have websites. Almost all of them have websites in English too, and it's like listening to Fox News, but it's interesting because you get a lot of information from that. So that's what I do, and I kind of hold myself so I don't vomit every time. But it's very good information. To see how they think, what they say, how they report about their own crimes, about their own reality.
Thank you.
A couple more, if there's time, let's see. George Gluck, we just have about maybe 5 more minutes. So George Gluck, I'm gonna unmute you.
Thank you. So I've run for Congress several times. 2018, I was at a forum and I argued that my Senator, Ben Cardin, wanted to make BDS illegal, basically. And I argued that that's a very slippery slope to start. And so I'll start with that. Also, I've demonstrated against the Muslim registry here in the United States. And I demonstrated against the administration, not Israel itself, but the administration, the last administration, which has finally left, thank God, on the streets of Tel Aviv. But I tell you that, so hopefully you will agree I have some receipts. Today, very coincidentally, I'm the son of 2 Holocaust survivors. So today, very coincidentally, there was a sermon given at the congregation I belong to, and I'd like to take just a minute to read a few paragraphs here. And I think what Miko said is true. There are lots of good people on the ground on both sides who would like to see peace. I'm not sure whether it's a one state solution or a 2-state solution that'll bring that, but I too would like to see it. And if I ever get to Congress, I'm willing to go there and do that. And pardon me, if you look at C-SPAN, you'll see what I said about that, but we don't have much time. So let me just read this. So this woman, I'll read it as if I were her. I would tell the story of Yadim Kaufman, who has established the Palestinian internship program, which mentors college-educated Palestinians from the West Bank and East Jerusalem and enables them to develop and build their careers and establish themselves as leaders in the Palestinian economy. His program is inspirational and successful. I would tell the story of Professor Nir Bums, an Israeli academic who organizes individuals from numerous Arab countries to build networks for cooperation with Israelis. Yusuf, a 22-year-old participant from Bahrain, told me that after his week in Israel, he felt like he had a second home there, wished he could stay longer, and hoped that he would be able to intern in Israel in the following year. He especially loved the freedom he experienced in the country. And it goes on and on. Since there isn't much time and you have some more people, I'm going to stop. And I just want to finish by saying, I certainly would not like to take on all the terrible things that were done by the last administration here in the United States. And I suspect none of us would like to do that. In the same way, I ask you to recognize that Israelis, Jews, and secular folks there are not homogeneous. There are lots of them, as Miko suggested, pardon me, that want to see their Palestinian brothers have an equal footing there. By the way, when I was at the Muslim registry, we were waiting, I was next to a young man who was from Afghanistan, Muslim from Afghanistan. We're waiting for a speaker to speak. And I talked to him and I said, I can't understand why we fight each other. We have the same father, Abraham. And we shook hands over that. And I think we need to do that on the ground. I mean, our first of 10 key values is grassroots democracy. And we have to give that a chance. We have to give that a chance in Palestine. We have to give that a chance in Israel. All too often, the leaders there get in the way. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you made some great comments. Let me start with the first one. Where you talk, Ben Cardin and his attempts to bring about, to legislate against BDS. What's really interesting is that, I don't know if you remember this, but I think it was 2019, the first bill out of the Senate. There was going to be a anti-BDS, anti-boycott clause, and Chris Van Hollen, the junior senator from Maryland, gave an incredible speech, 29-minute speech. It's on YouTube, where he, goes on and on and on about how much he loves Israel and wants to give Israel all the money and weapons in the world. But this legislation is going beyond, it's just crossing a red line. And he quoted and he talked about all the court cases where they threw it out of court and all. And that to me is so valuable, because that is the biggest threat to Israelis, to the Zionists, to Israel, that somebody who supports Israel 110% stands up and he says, well, but there are limits, and we're not going to cross those limits. And so I thought that was terrific. And I mean, look, of course there's good people. Of course there's people who want to do good everywhere. The problem with leadership on the Israeli side is that Israelis keep voting for these same people. So obviously there's a majority there that supports what's happening. And that's the challenge on that side. The challenge on that side is to bring about that kind of change. And I suspect that change will come the day after. You said you're not sure one state, two state. Two states is really kind of a part of the Zionist paradigm, where Israel has a right to exist over most of Palestine, and Palestinians will be given a small semblance of a state under conditions that Israel agrees to, where it's neither practical nor fair, because Israel will never agree. So that kind of gives Israel that power to never agree. A single democracy, what they call rights, is really, I mean, a single state already exists. So now it's a question of transforming it from an apartheid state to a democracy, which I think is what is actually going to happen. But yeah, I think you raised some fantastic points. Yeah, that was terrific. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Just with about 2 minutes, I want to mention Tina, I believe Rocket has posted something in the chat about a workshop coming up, ongoing with Veterans for Peace, the Green Party Peace Action Committee, and a few other things. And hopefully you can find that in the chat room and join in for that if you wish. I'm not seeing any further questions. So Diane, if you had one quickly, otherwise we could just let Miko wrap up. And thank you very much for having been our guest. Thank you.
I think I can go pretty quick
if
you have a minute. Hi, Miko. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to see you again. How are you?
Good to see you. Yeah, I'm trying to make this quick. Of course, I'm all about the BDS, spreading the word about the BDS. But what are your thoughts on HR 2590, the Defending Human Rights of Palestinian Children and Families, dealing with, U.S. funds shouldn't go to the abuse, torture, and detention of children.
Yeah, that's David McCollum. That's the McCollum bill.
Yeah, I'm curious, what is the sentiment with your connections to the Palestinian activists on the ground? How do they, I know it's very symbolic, but is it worthwhile for us to bother our representatives and act on that? What are your thoughts?
Oh, absolutely worthwhile. Absolutely worthwhile. I mean, the bill, at least in its previous version, I don't know if it changed much this time around. I haven't read it this time around. But the bill itself in its previous version, original version at least, was excellent, was very well written. It actually lays out the crimes, the things that Israel does with Palestinian children when it detains them. And it demands, I believe, that the Secretary of State ensure that funds that go to Israel will not be used for these facilities. I mean, it's a wonderful bill. I think it's wonderful to have it there just for discussion as well. And then, to shame the people that, how can you not support a bill like that? It's, this is, we're talking about children. And many of us know Palestinian activists whose children now, who are now, old, and their children are now the activists, and they're the ones who are being arrested and tortured and so on. So I think it's very, very important to support this bill. Very important to nag our elected officials, at least to explain, how do you not support a bill like that? How can you, what kind of shameless human being does not support a bill that is designed to protect children and families? So yeah, absolutely, I'm all for it, 110%. Yeah.
And I'm seeing this is HR 2590. What was the number again?
Yes, HR 2590.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's the McCollum bill. She's been, and I think she has a few more sponsors this time around. But I think absolutely that's exactly the kind of pressure that we need to be putting on our elected officials to support precisely that, or to explain why they're not supporting it and shame them. But absolutely, yeah. You want me to sum up real quick? Is that what you want me to do?
If you want to, we're a little bit over time, but that's great. And thank you.
Well, I'll just say in less than a minute, kind of reiterate what I said before. I think it's up to us. I think we have the skill, we've got the resources, we certainly have the life and the ability to do things, and the consequences for us. I mean, I just had my global, I used to travel a lot before COVID, and I had a global pass, and it was just revoked, and I'm not really quite sure why. But I mean, these are the kinds of things that as privileged people, we perhaps a price that we have to pay from time to time, but for what we do, for standing up for what's right. But seriously, whatever price we have to pay, if at all, it's the right thing to do. And being free and alive and living in this rich country as we do, I think we are. We must stand up. I think it's our responsibility to stand up and to fight for Palestine and to speak for Palestine and to do more to prevent, to do everything we possibly can to raise the rhetoric and stop and prevent the next round of violence against Palestinians. Absolutely. So again, thank you. It's always a pleasure to be with the Green Party people. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. This is, I said, an enlivening and informative presentation. We hope to see more of you. And thank you for making time in your busy schedule. And thanks all of you who showed up. I'm really